I wish the videos were public that you guys take of these meetings. I have looked at your website and they don't appear to be public. There's like a video link, but it goes to like a 5-second clip or something.
Thoughts can keep you down, pushing deep until you drown, or they can keep you up strong, focused on the now.
20 hours a week,
Alright, I'm going to call us to order just because we do have a pretty packed agenda today. So, Commissioner Webb, are you okay with getting set up while we get started?
Yeah.
Perfect. So, PCR is called to order September 6th at 6:04 p.m. Second item of business is to approve the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda? Commissioner Rodenberg, is there a second? Commissioner Forsstrom, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, next order of business is to approve the August 2nd, 2023 meeting minutes. So I'll give everyone a few minutes to look those over, and when you are ready, I'll entertain a motion. Moved by Commissioner Rodenberg. Is there a second? Commissioner Florman for the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, moving right along to our next order of business, and that's the chair's report for the open session. So I just have a few things. I'm going to keep it short because we do have, like I said, a lot to get through on our agenda today. Last week or 2 weeks ago, we interviewed 2 potential commissioner candidates, and we did forward one name to the mayor's office for appointment, so that we'll move through the process and hopefully we'll see a new commissioner seated. We are still accepting applications and interviewing, so if you do know of anyone who would be a great addition to the commission, I encourage you to send along the information. In terms of attendance and timely arrival, just a reminder to the commission that per ordinance, we are only allowed 3 absences in a calendar year. If the 3 are met, then the mayor's office can make the decision to remove commissioners for non-attendance. So I want to put that out there. Also, in our SOPs, it does state that we should arrive here 15 minutes prior to make sure that we are set up technology-wise, so we can get our equipment set up and get our meetings started on time to ensure we have enough time to deliberate all cases. So I'm just going to really ask us to lean into being here for every meeting we're able and being here 15 minutes early to get it set up. There was a change to open meeting laws that is being evaluated by the city attorney's office, and that is a change that would allow folks who serve on these bodies to call into meetings or be on video for meetings due to health reasons. So it's a limited scope. It's being evaluated by the city attorney. We do not have any concrete plans on how we will roll this out to the commission, but it is being evaluated, and there's more to come on that. Coordinator Cumberland.
Thank you, Chair Hayes. Just to add, the exemption does also apply to folks who are in active military service if they're in a required drill or duty. So we're working on a staff report that'll have some background for you, updates on the law, as well as a proposed policy for the commission.
Awesome, thank you. And then there is also a change to the PODCO laws that went into effect August 1st that the city attorney is reviewing regarding investigative bodies or oversight bodies being able to ask questions of complainants giving testimony. So the city attorney is reviewing that to determine how that impacts our process, if there are any changes that need to be made to bylaws or SOPs. Obviously nothing is going to change now until that is vetted out, but I did ask for a staff report from the city attorney so that we can review what those changes are.
Commissioner Hayes, if you just say complainants giving testimony, it would be anybody.
Anybody, okay,
So
thank
complainants
you.
or officers.
All right. So it's a pretty significant change to oversight processes that the city attorney is diligently looking after. When we have information, we will definitely send that out. Next, that is all for my public portion chair report. The next topic on our agenda is a presentation regarding the new Minnesota marijuana laws and SPPD, and Commander Peterson is going to give us an overview of what that looks like in the city of St. Paul.
Thank you, Chair Hayes. In my career and most officers' career, the body-worn camera was probably one of the biggest transitions that people faced as far as new policing. But that was an addition. That was something new. It wasn't taking anything away. It was something new to learn. Arguably, as the chief has said, the cannabis laws are probably a bigger change for law enforcement officers in Minnesota, even compared to BWC. Because anyone that's been operating in law enforcement prior to this change has always operated under the guise that this was an illegal substance. And so this is a really big change in law enforcement. We've already had several rounds of preliminary training with our officers, and there's going to be more training coming in October and November for all of our staff. But I think that grace will be necessary as everyone tries to work through what this new law means, and as case law is established, depending on arrests and convictions and other things. So this will be a major change, and we're doing our best to educate our officers as to what this means and how this is going to change things. And this was obviously in addition to a massive public safety bill, which had a lot of other 600 some pages, I believe, of changes that are being evaluated still by city attorneys and county attorneys all across the state. So there's a lot of changes, but just to give you a brief overview of what our officers are receiving so far on the marijuana changes and how we're interpreting things as we see them so far. So marijuana is being decriminalized in Minnesota. And obviously in many states it's still against the law, and federally it's still against the law, which is a really big part of this because as police officers it's federal law that we cannot have firearms and be using cannabis. So police officers in our city are still going to be prohibited from any cannabis use on or off duty. And those laws are being challenged all throughout the country, and so I think there's going to be more to come on that over the next couple of years. But as of now, that's how Minnesota stands. Drug paraphernalia is now legal in Minnesota. However, it is still a city ordinance that drug paraphernalia is illegal. So as you'll hear me talk over the next few minutes, education is really important to the chief here because we are going to be educating the public as much about these laws as we're educating our officers about these laws. So when somebody says, nope, I can have this now, it's legal, I'm fine, we're going to be educating our officers and the public to say, actually, there's a St. Paul City ordinance that prohibits you from having drug paraphernalia. And I think it's going to take some time for ordinances to match up with the new laws. And some cities, I believe Duluth, for example, has already come out and said that cannabis use in public places is illegal there, right? But our city has not moved in any direction whatsoever yet, and that's fine. But there will obviously be more to come. So drug paraphernalia is one big change where some people might believe it's totally legal, but it's still going to be against the city ordinance, so will be illegal in St. Paul. The new law effective August 1st of this year that cannabis is now allowed in private residences, on private property that's not accessible to the public, and on the premise of a business or event if they're licensed for on-site consumption. So that's kind of where we're operating at as of right now. Currently, the Clean Air Act, or the MCIAA, will still regulate the use of cannabis as well as cigarette smoke and vaping products in all of the same areas that have been regulated before, such as arenas, auditoriums, banquet facilities, bars and restaurants, bowling alleys, libraries, factories, employee cafeterias. All those areas that were covered before under the Clean Indoor Air Act are still going to be covered today. We also still have several air acts pertaining to schools that are drug-free for schools. So university campuses and school campuses are still going to be prohibited for possession and use. And that's something, again, that we're going to be educating the public about. The chief has said that our number one thing is going to be educating the public whenever possible. We have not been out on the streets for the last couple of years focusing our efforts on small amounts of marijuana. That has not been St. Paul's focus, and it's not going to be our focus. The chief has said we are going to be educating people whenever and wherever we can, and they're actually developing cards to hand out to folks that say, hey, here's kind of a summary of the new laws, and here's a QR code where you can go and you can start reading about some of this for yourself. And those are in the final stages of development. Cannabis is not allowed in a motor vehicle. So as we talk about the next couple bits here, it's very similar to alcohol use. When you think of drinking and when you think of smoking cannabis, there's a lot of similarities. You can't do it in a car. You can't do it while you're driving down the road. And so those are very similar. You cannot use it, as I mentioned, in school property. And another big point in the new statute is that anywhere the smoke could be inhaled by a minor. And obviously that could be somewhat arbitrary depending on who's around and how old people look and what direction the wind is blowing. But that's something that's going to be important if people are choosing to smoke cannabis outside at a public event or on public streets or sidewalks. If there's minors in the area, then that would prohibit them from that kind of use.
Sorry, question, you said it's not allowed in cars, is that just for consumption, or can it be transported in cars?
Good question, and I'll come up to that. This is still just the use
Just
section.
adult use, got it.
This is just the use, yep. So driving down the road, it'd be similar to alcohol. You cannot have it in the passenger compartment and using it, or be impaired smoking it while you drive, just like having an open bottle in the front of your car. There's also another part of the statute that says you cannot use cannabis in a multifamily housing building. So if you think of any apartment building in the city, cannabis would be prohibited in any type of multifamily or apartment building in the city. So there's a lot of little nuances that we're learning about this, and as I said, we're probably going to ask for grace as we kind of do the best we can to interpret these and see how the courts interpret some of these as well. To transportation, to answer your question, and possession, up to 2 ounces of cannabis flower, and flower is the legislative term. That's not a term that we have generally used in law enforcement, but flower is the term that they used in all of their statutes, and that basically means the dried, smokable plant portion of the cannabis. Up to 2 ounces of possession is legal for adults. Transportation in a motor vehicle has to be in a specific unopened package, and it has to be labeled from where it was sold or manufactured. And that is a challenging statute because there's nowhere in Minnesota yet that is selling it with that type of packaging. So again, I think that this is going to take some time to sort out, but that's kind of some of the confusion our officers are going to be working through. Is it's supposed to be unopened packaging, and it's supposed to be specifically labeled. Individuals can have up to 2 pounds of cannabis in their home residence. And we bought several pounds of oregano as our department so we could put it into a package and show our officers, this is what 2 ounces looks like, and this is what 2 pounds looks like. And it was a lot of oregano that we passed around. So it's a large package. You can grow up to 8 plants in your home, and no more than 4 of those can be mature plants. And again, all of these things are very detailed as far as what is a mature plant and how far along the flowers have to be. And so there's going to be a lot of more to come, I think, on that. Gifting of cannabis is allowed by statute. So you can give cannabis to someone else as long as they're over the legal age of 21. We're telling our officers that they still need to be very safe. There's a large percentage of the cannabis marijuana that we encounter that's laced with fentanyl. And that's not going to change anytime in the near future, in our opinion, because a lot of it is going to be purchased illegally still. I know that there's 2 locations in Minnesota that are selling it legally now already. I believe White Earth and there's another spot farther north. Red Lake, thank you. And I would assure those are probably not laced with fentanyl, but a lot of the cannabis that we're going to be seeing probably still is. So that's something that we're working through. Along with that, the legislature has said that all officers now have to carry 2 doses of Narcan, which is good for the public. So all officers that are on duty on the street will have 2 doses of Narcan now instead of 1. We've gone through with the officers what those possession crimes look like and what the different levels are. And we've also talked about concentrates and edibles because all of those laws are changing as well. And bringing cannabis back from other states is not legal. So if you have folks that are now driving to other states to purchase it and bringing it back to Minnesota, that is not allowed yet by statute.
Commander, just a quick question. So clearly, with all the odd nuance and stuff like that, and sort of learning as we go, does SPP and then you factor in discretion, for example? Is there sort of a plan internally to kind of track this a little bit differently when officers use discretion, when they didn't, under what circumstances, and so on, to try to maybe help shape the policy as well?
So they've modified our report system. So you all see police reports, they've actually modified that system in preparation for this. So any case involving marijuana now has a checkbox the officers have to check. And that will allow our analysts to immediately pull out every case involving marijuana in the city so that we can start analyzing that data later.
Got it. Thank you.
Commissioner Rosenberg.
Yeah. So what about, I want to bring back to the inhaled by a child. So how does that relate to child protection?
Sure, that's a great question. I don't think any of the laws changed around that. You know, our duty is still, if the child's welfare is immediately in danger, then we would have to take action. But obviously that's a consideration, and sadly, as you know, we deal with those cases regularly involving illegal substances at homes and use of, and there's been tragic consequences with edibles and other things around the country for that kind of stuff. So hopefully there's not a rise of that here as well.
I imagine it'll be trial and error and see how it's found in the child and then what happened and so forth.
Yeah, that's potentially what other states have seen, and we would probably see some of that here as well. The DWI is not going to change, right? So we have officers that are going to be doing field sobriety tests. However, there is no machine to test you on the side of the road for how much THC is in your system. And so I imagine there's some probably big smart companies, smarter than me, that are working on that machine as we speak. But until that comes out, the officers will be drafting search warrants for people's blood or urine, and that's how they would potentially be charged with a DWI in these types of cases. And that process hasn't changed, because it's still against the law to be operating a vehicle while you're impaired. Transporting in a vehicle, I forgot to mention that it has to be in the trunk if you're going to transport cannabis in the trunk, and that's another educational piece that we'll be educating people on. Is it needs to be in that sealed packaging, it needs to be less than 2 ounces, and you have to have it outside of the driver compartment of the vehicle. There's a lot of new laws about cultivation and plants, and you probably have seen in the news some of that going on already. And again, I think that it's going to take some time to sort out when does a plant become a cannabis plant, and at what age level does it count per statute. And seeds you can purchase seeds now today because seeds don't have any THC in them. So there's a lot of nuances to this, and we're doing the best we can to learn as we go. And then we're fighting some other internal battles, such as if we collect legal cannabis from someone, what is our obligation as far as giving that back to them as their property, and what liabilities do we have if they are potentially laced with fentanyl? And those are a lot of things that we're trying to deal with internally to sort out to make sure that we're doing what's best for the city and what's best for the public. There's a lot of other parts of the public safety bill, including carjacking, catalytic converter thefts, and some bicycling laws and a lot of other things. And the chief has made it a priority that we're going to have as much training as possible, and we're going to be educating as much as possible. And so hopefully that kind of gives you a brief rundown of where we're at with everything, and happy to answer any other questions that you have.
Commissioner Forster.
Commander, and this might be a little too much in the weeds, and if it is, just let me know. So given the change in law, does this have any effect that you're aware of on, and I don't remember the term off the top of my head, like if you're caught doing a crime but you have this, then it's enhanced or something like that. Does this law change any of those combinations?
So I haven't seen anything about any enhancements due to cannabis use. The DWI laws have not changed in that regard. So that's not something that I've seen as far as any type of enhancements at all.
Okay, or reduction, like no longer an enhancement because it's now legal or something.
And I haven't seen that either. There is a very large section of the public safety bill and the cannabis bill that has to do with expungements though. So the BCA is going to be working over the next couple of years on what that looks like. And that's way over my head to try to determine what types of crimes are going to be expunged and how they are expunged and what that does to people's criminal records. But it's a pretty massive undertaking, as you all can imagine.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, of course.
Commissioner Schlinger.
I imagine this will be added to the Civilian Police Academy curriculum.
That's a great question. I know that they.
It was a very leading question.
Yes, they have their agenda set, I believe, starting September. This month, I think they start at the end of the month or something.
27th.
Thank you. And, but I will certainly connect with them because this is something super important that'd be good to highlight for 20 minutes during the CPA.
Okay. 20 minutes, 6 hours.
This is Chair Hayes. You mentioned that there's going to be a box check for anything that involves marijuana. What types of data will you be tracking connected with those cases, and when do you anticipate reporting out?
I think it's probably too early to make any speculation on that. I know that the reason that data point was put in was because we saw what the potential outcome was for this, and we saw how other states were having difficulty tracking data, and we wanted to get out in front of it. So I know that's why they initiated that on the report form, so that when we move forward, we'll be able to immediately parse those out and start getting those out. But as far as what type of data is collected and when, I wouldn't have any guess on that just yet.
And as a follow-up, I think it would be really valuable for maybe quarterly to get an update, since this is a pretty big new piece of policy in the city, around what we're seeing for trends, particularly as it relates to demographics, age, gender, race, ethnicity, and even to an extent that we can, the geography, that we're seeing scenarios regarding marijuana enforcement taking place. I think that would just be a good gut check for us. And additionally, if there are policies getting drafted to go into the policy manual, it would be really helpful for us to be able to take a look, give some feedback, maybe in another kind of give and take session like this at a meeting, because I think this is a really important new way that we can partner and be kind of collaborative, both as an oversight commission and with the department.
Yeah, I'll make a note of that for sure. And I think it's important that the chief would tell you that possession of a small amount of cannabis has not been our priority for a long time. Much like with motor vehicle violations, you know, when we switched and moved away from equipment type violations, right? Those are coming down from the city and county attorney and from the chief's office collaboratively. And so I don't think there's going to be a big trend of now enforcement. I don't think there's a big wantonness for that. I mean, the reason I believe of these laws was to try to get away from that, and the chief knows that. So I think that I wouldn't probably predict that's going to happen, but yes, I think that quarterly data report outs would be very beneficial. So sorry, that was a long random answer.
That's perfect, thank you. Commissioner Schlinger.
I think after that data report, I do remember from going back to the school police academy. I'm not really the question this time. But I remember when, I don't remember if it was a commander or sergeant from the Georgia came in and said, still the most prevalent drug that's prevalent in violent crime is still marijuana. And this is after the edible law has been passed. So the crimes that are concurrent with marijuana being present, does that change over time with this law? It happened with the edible. I would just be curious, because that was shocking to everyone. Nobody expected her to say marijuana. So just curious about its continued linkage with violent crime, or if that changes somehow.
Any other questions?
Commander, is the briefing that you kind of just gave us an overview of, will something like that be available on the police department's website?
That's a good question, and I could certainly check with the chief of staff to see if that's something that they'd be willing to put out there as kind of a, we call it here's the story at work, you know, like here's kind of some updates, and I'll certainly check with her on that.
Deputy Director of Commerce.
Thank you. I just want to take a moment for the public and just make note that although the police officers will be carrying 2 doses of Narcan, 2 doses of Narcan isn't guaranteed to reverse a fentanyl overdose. That fentanyl can still be lethal even with 2 doses of Narcan, and then there are test strips, so people who choose to use, they can test for the drugs before they
And this is Chair Hayes. I have just a question because I'm not very experienced in what marijuana quantities look like. I can imagine a pound of oregano. I can imagine 2 ounces of oregano. Are there limits on edibles or like the seltzers that are sold? Are there limits on how much you can transport and how much of that is, what does that look like, I guess?
Yes, there are limits to the edibles and concentrate, and they are very specific, and we're not even able to train our officers just yet on what that looks like because it's going to require some additional equipment and additional training. But when we speak with our narcotics folks, that is not something we see regularly anyway. The bulk of what we're dealing with is going to be the flower, and there is a linkage to those violent crimes still, I believe. And then the second part of your question for drinks, all of the current drinks I believe that are sold, and now someone else could jump in, is a different Delta variant. So those are subject to a different part of the statute. So the drinks are not covered in this new statute at all. That was a previous statute, Delta variant. And I want to say 8 or 9 was the old one and 9 is the new one, but I'm getting beyond my experience here.
Thank you. Any further questions? All right, well, I really appreciate bringing this to the forefront. I can imagine, right, with the amount of discretion that's involved in these stops or potential violations, we may see some complaints that come forward, and it's helpful to understand what the goal of the department is, and then be able to move forward as a team assessing complaints. All right. Next item on the agenda is our SPPD update.
And all I'll finish with is that we're excited to introduce everyone to Sergeant Amy Boyer. She is a longtime veteran of St. Paul Police and the city of St. Paul. She's a very experienced investigator, and she's wonderful. I'll let her introduce herself very briefly to the group.
Well, thank you. Like Jake said, my name is Amy Boyer. I'm born and raised in St. Paul, and I am just recently transferred into the Internal Affairs unit, so I'm really excited for this opportunity. And here, like you said, I am a veteran. I tend to just stay a little bit seasoned, but so I've been on the department since I entered the academy in 1996. So.
And what areas have you worked in?
So I worked patrol. I worked the squad car, which was squad car midnights for a long time on the east side. That's where I was born and raised. I spent time in the family violence unit. I spent time in homicide, and I most recently, my most recent assignment was in the ACOP program, so which is the community outreach program with all of the public housing in St. Paul, and now I, like I said, just recently transferred here.
Well, welcome. Thank you. Looking forward to working with you. Any questions for our brand new addition to the team? All right. Any other SPP?
No, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Next, we will move on to the Hero Department report. Deputy Director Connors.
Thank you, Chair.
I might have stolen a few of your updates in mine. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Good evening, everybody. I can be quick. This is budget season in the city of St. Paul. You'll hear it around every corner. Our budget request as a department has been approved by the mayor. The next step is the city council. Our main priority in the department for me and Deputy Director Ledger, as we also act in the interim co-director roles, is to fill all of the open positions, which I'm proud to say we should have completed by year end. We should finally have a full team. Continuous improvement, and then getting down our SOPs. So we are only asking for one additional staff person, and that is a communications staff member, because, for example, there are about 15 of us who have to edit the website. And the impact of having 15 people who need retraining and retraining and retraining on our Office of Technology is even huge. So think about, it's a patchwork quilt of messages, as well as we are big users of time for our tech department. So, so budget, hiring, and then the third update from the department is outreach. And I will pass it over to Coordinator Cumberland for the outreach.
Thank you, Deputy Director. Hey everyone, good to see you all. So, thank you. So I've been working on outreach lately, and so I have reached out to every single one of the 17 district councils here in the city of St. Paul, and so far I've scheduled 5. So I'll be giving a presentation on Know Your Rights. So it's a brief overview of St. Paul's labor standards laws, the anti-discrimination laws, as well as the PCR and the different options folks have for filing the complaint. So I'm getting out there and meeting with district councils, and as well as connecting with some other groups. Oh, this Saturday, we will also be at Selby Jazz Fest. So I hope you are all able to come outside and enjoy the gorgeous semi-fall weather, swing by the Hero booth. And then we will also be at the Eastside Freedom Libraries having a Labor Day event. And so some of the Hero team will also be there. So we hope to see you.
Feel free to join us for Selby Jazz Fest. If you have an extra hour and you'd like to table, it is a great place to recruit community members to join as PCR commissioners. This, I believe, the next CPA, which is required for everybody serving on the PCR, starts September 27th, right? So there hopefully is still time for somebody to get involved. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, next up is the monthly complaint summary data. I'm going to give y'all a chance to look at the data that is presented. Coordinator Cumberland made some really interesting observations with some data, so I will have her go over those once we get through this higher level.
I just want to say that this is a little different format than you're used to. Sierra's also changing the format.
It should be the same as last month.
Okay.
Does anyone have any questions or thoughts, comments about the data that we're looking at? Commissioner Schlinder, I can see you grabbing your...
Yep, I love data. Do we do a year-over-year look at this at the end of the year during our annual summit?
Coordinator Cumberland.
Thank you, Shirley. That is a great question. So we only recently started, I believe it was last year, this first started becoming available on the PCR agenda. And so the 2022 annual report, which will be coming out next month, will also have the 2022 data, complaint data. So we will begin to be able to compare that year over year. I think that's a great idea to check trends.
Any other thoughts, questions? Coordinator Cumberland, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Hayes. And so we discussed, Beth and I noticed that, well, so we took a look at some data. So the cases that have been deliberated by the PCR in 2023, including the 6 cases that are on the September lineup, 7 were filed by individuals that identify as men, and 16 were filed by women. And so I thought that was a really interesting data point. Chair Hayes asked me to aggregate the data based on like the PCR's recommendations based on gender, and I neglected to do that. So I apologize, I don't have that for you today, but I will bring it to the October meeting. Thank you, Chair Hayes. So yeah, that's a really significant discrepancy. And no complaints, we didn't identify any complaints filed by non-binary individuals either, just to cover the bases.
Commissioner Rodenberg sent me an email earlier today, and I'm wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about your thoughts on.
So this relates to this, reminded me of the 16 women who filed complaints versus a smaller number of men. So I was wondering if we could have a training on the body search protocol when you have female people with a male officer, vice versa, or now with non-binary people or transgender or social. So what are the policies and protocols with that? I'm kind of curious about that given our information that we're looking at. And so that could be put on a future training, or if it's a big topic, or if someone wants to respond to it.
This is Chair Hayes. I thought that was a great idea for training. I would almost expand to and talk about how are we training our officers around their bias in how they're approaching other members of the community, either based on their size differential, their perceived power differential. How are we training our officers in how they're engaging and interacting with community members that are traditionally not in those roles of power? Commissioner Schlitter.
So to comment, I would say it was addressed in the CPA. I'm just going to stay on the CPA the whole night, apparently. I thought really well that power differential and the Civilian Police Academy.
Oh,
So, anyways, I think the training exists, and I think a refresher is a great idea. My question for you, Coordinator Cumberland, is that the only demographic marker you looked at, or is that the only one that stood out to you as there was a significant discrepancy?
Coordinator Cumberland, thank you, Chair.
So that is one that I pulled because I, based on the case lineup for this month, which I won't say too much about, but it sparked my interest to look at that number. And so on the complaint form, we do ask certain demographic questions. And then, so all of the complaints filed by HERO, we do release like demographic info in the annual report, but I looked specifically at cases that were deliberated by the PCR, and I don't have access to all of those complaint forms. And so this is one data point that I was able to pull relatively quickly, but I would certainly be open to digging into other information if there are certain metrics that interest the commission.
Commissioner Foreman.
Could you repeat those numbers one more time for Chair Cumberland?
Yeah, you betcha.
If I may, could you also explain, and maybe I just read into your body language, but is there a question about explaining between cases submitted to HERO and not, and, oh, okay, you understand that difference. Okay.
Yeah. My question is more about, we're seeing this discrepancy with gender. Are we going to see a similar discrepancy with age, with race, with, language, like, and I know we don't have all that data.
Yeah.
I know that. Like, I look data, I would go down the rabbit hole every day, but if there are other discrepancies, again, lots of reasons for them, lots of insight can be driven from it, it would just be interesting as a starting point.
Yeah, this is Chair Hayes. I think getting some of those data points might help us target outreach as well.
Yeah.
Right, we might just not be getting the message to males in our community that this is a resource that's available for many reasons. Coordinator Cumberland, sorry, I just jumped right in.
I really value the discussion, and I appreciate, I enjoy thinking these through too. So, Commissioner Foreman, 23 cases so far this year, 7 men, 16 women.
Got it. If I may, that's inferred gender, because we don't have all of the, demographic background, because some of the cases that come forward have come in through SPPD, and we don't have a chance to
No?
Sorry, this is Coordinator Cumberland here, so.
Those are just hours.
No, these are pulled off of, so the case lineups that Internal Affairs compiles each month, they list the genders, so it's based on that.
But we'll never get a whole picture. But that's why it's inferred, because we don't always know.
Yeah, our Internal Affairs, yeah, the information that.
Here it is, compiled.
And the other thing with the complaint form is that folks can choose not to fill that out too. So it'll always be, it'll never be totally complete, but there are certainly ways that we could do a little better with data, do a little more with data. Thank you.
All right, any further discussion regarding the data? All right, so our final agenda topic for the open meeting portion is a discussion regarding the PCR bylaws. And I did send out an email kind of recapping the situation. What I do want to do right now is just take a few minutes and read the email into the record for this open meeting, just so that we have the record of it. So the background here is that the PCR has been leveraging disposition and discipline one-pager, and you all have a copy of that in your agenda packet. That gets saved to our BDI each month when cases are uploaded. The document has been read into the record multiple times and has been considered by the current seated commissioners to be the source of truth as far as what options can be recommended. However, we have had questions in the past several months about the origin of that document and whether it is in fact the source of the truth. On August 15th, Commissioner Forstrom and I met with Deputy Director of Commerce, Coordinator Cumberland, Assistant Chief Surveyor, thank you, and Director Noel Nix to discuss what we're looking at and what we should do to correct it. So a couple of facts to note as it relates to this discussion that we're about to have. The ordinance itself does not define disposition and discipline recommendation options. The ordinance states that the commission shall develop policies and procedures to guide the work of the commission. There are no provisions in the SOPs that you also have a copy of in your agenda packet today. There are no provisions in the SOPs that outline disposition and discipline recommendation options. And the bylaws that you have a copy of currently allow for the dispositions of sustained, not sustained, unfounded, exonerated, and policy failure, and disciplines of oral reprimand, written reprimand, suspension, demotion, and termination, with an option to recommend training in addition to discipline. The one-pager allows for all of the options in the bylaws with the addition of a disposition of commended and a discipline of supervisory counseling. And an important thing to note is that the chief may leverage any of the options included on the one-pager in his final decision. So we have before us a decision to make as a commission around whether we operate under the bylaws as they've been voted in on by previous commissions and as they've been published, or whether we choose to amend by adding either commended or supervisory counseling into the bylaws. So we have that as an option. This discussion needs to be very narrowly focused. We are not opening up any other portions of the bylaws because it is important to get very robust community engagement. But as a commission, we do need to know the rules under which we operate so that we can adjudicate cases and review them according to a set standard of disciplines and dispositions. So before we entertain any motions, if anybody wants to, make a motion to do anything, I just want to open it up to dialogue about the process, about the question, about where these documents came from, about what the discussion that was had between city staff and SPPD, and then we'll go from there. Deputy Director of Commerce.
I have been instructed to just make sure that it's in the record that the Bureau Department and the Mayor's Office would like to see public dialogue, larger public dialogue with the documentation. So I just need to make that clear.
Yep, thank you. Commissioner Schlender.
So when commended and supervisory counseling were added, at what point were they added? They've never been added.
So
Am I understanding that correctly?
this is Chair Hayes. From what we could see based on previous minutes and previous records,
We don't know.
So they were, just to clarify, they were added to this one pager.
Correct.
They've never been added
To the bylaws, correct.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure it was clear on that.
Yeah, Commissioner Forster.
Yeah, I can provide a hair more clarity on that, which is in the past, I've been on the commission for a number of years now. In the past, there was discussion related to both commended and supervisory counseling, and if anyone's interested in some of that discussion, I'm happy to provide it because I was there when it occurred. There was discussion had for each of those. We assume it was vetted appropriately through SPPD. And the city of St. Paul, I can't say for sure whether that was the case, but the miss there was that, hey, look, you're changing something like that, so you probably want to change the bylaws. That's where the disconnect occurred. At some point, the commission wanted those things to be available to them, but the miss was that the bylaws were never updated.
Any other questions, discussion? So at this point, what I would like to do is open the floor to any motions, and the motion option would be A, leave the bylaws as is, and we no longer reference the one pager, we reference the bylaws for discipline and disposition. Option B is to discuss adding commended to disposition, and option C is adding supervisory counseling to discipline. Those are the three motions for this purpose, since we're keeping the discussion very narrow, that would be on the table. Commissioner Schillender.
I would move for option A, reference the bylaws and not the one pager without further.
Is there a second? Commissioner Florman? Second. All right, we'll do a discussion. Commissioner Schillender, why don't you kick us off with the discussion?
I do think due process is really critical and it's important, and I believe that previous members of the commission have the best interest and have really good reasons for adding these things, but if they're not in the bylaws, I do believe that the public gets to weigh in on what's in the bylaws, and it would be in our best interest to follow that due process if we were going to add those to the case's position and decisions.
Commissioner Rosenberg.
So I understand that point. I also have found that I mostly want to recommend supervisory counsel. In fact, that happens more often than not. So how long would it be before the bylaws are amended?
I think this is Chair Hayes. I think that's a valid question. I would look to city staff to tell us what they feel is robust community engagement based on your partnership with the mayor's office and the concerns that you brought. Deputy Director of Commerce.
I never get that right, I'm so sorry. Chair Hayes, the only example that I can give is the one that I gave you before. When we changed rules for emergency and safe time ordinance, we did a 30-day comment period, and then we worked hard as a staff to get the word out. We had an online tool for people to submit comments, and in this case, we would be very deliberate about asking to go speak to some organizations. We would invite you. We would create the opportunity for you to go speak with them in here, and in the absence of your availability, then we would do it for you and record the meeting. So I think at the very minimum, I would like to say you could get it done by October, but I think realistically, Chair Hayes, it would be November.
And to clarify, you're referencing bylaws of the commission around earned leave and sick time, or are you referencing an ordinance?
I'm referencing rules around ordinance.
So, okay,
Yeah.
so the complication there is there's ordinance, there's SOPs, there's bylaws.
Yeah. So I would say November, if you had an idea as to what you wanted to add tonight, we could take that out to the community and you could be making a voting decision. Sarah, that should okay.
And I'm just gonna ask another question. Would the mayor's office support, or the mayor's administration support the staff spending time going out to ask these questions? Or is that a non-starter with the current makeup of the administration?
100% the mayor's office would support community engagement and our spending. As a matter of fact, what's.
In support of these specific potential additions? That's
We would
more
not
my
be
question.
advocating for any position either way. We would just be helping create the space for you to advocate or you to ask. It's not ours to recommend what changes you should make to your bylaws, but we can create the process for you to have it.
Okay.
Or if you couldn't be there, we could engage the discussion for you, gather feedback, and
Commissioner Rosenberg.
So I have a question of Commander Peterson. I believe in the past, I thought that officers received some supervisory counseling anyway when they had an issue. Was it discussed with the officers what had happened in a particular situation as an additional learning experience beyond whatever we recommend?
Commander Peterson.
I think that conversation was around discipline, and the conversation was that in any situation, the officer is always receiving counseling. And when I say counseling, I mean they're sitting down with the supervisor to talk about the entire situation as a whole. But as you're discussing it here, supervisory counseling is an option, a sole option that is not considered formal discipline, but requires that supervisory meeting / coaching, mentoring, training time. And that's, I believe, what you're discussing here now.
And to that point, if there are ever departures that are made from a recommendation, if the commission were to recommend an oral reprimand, which is just a discipline, the chief can depart, I guess it would be a downward departure, to a supervisory counseling. So he maintains that ability to assign a supervisory counseling, even if the PCR were to recommend an oral reprimand, and it's considered a departure from what the commission recommends.
Okay. Well, that's helpful. So,
Commissioner Rosenberg.
Sort of in support of your motion. I'm in favor of, following bylaws, and I'm also really strongly wanting the option for officers to get some education through one-on-one discussion with their superiors. So I'd be reluctant to take this away. But if it's only going to be a couple months, maybe, before the bylaws have the opportunity to be changed anyway, and if I think that officers get some assistance from their immediate superiors and beyond, then I would be reassured to support the motion.
Commissioner Forsstrom.
So I would just remind the commission, because probably when this comes up again, unless something changes, I probably won't be around to have to deal with it. But my recommendation, though, is that communication around this is very carefully crafted, because some of these things are part of the agreement between the city and the St. Paul Police Labor Union, right? We couldn't, if the community overwhelmingly wanted us to be able to recommend, I'm making this up, 45 days of suspension, for example, that might run contrary to the union agreement. And so the way that, however this is approached, should be really carefully crafted. I would also just, my own personal opinion is to keep in mind that as much as possible, I think the PCR needs to be to some degree neutral, right? And be neither a complainant advocacy nor an officer advocacy body, but a somewhat neutral advocacy body that advocates for just how we would want to be policed. And just to kind of keep those things in mind. And if anyone, I don't know that it has to be part of this discussion here, but if anyone wants to grab me offline and kind of talk about how some of these sort of came to be, or I can do it here, that's fine too. Just to provide some of the background and then let you all make your decisions.
Commissioner Schillender.
I want to echo what Commissioner Forsman said. I think when we go to community, if that's what we decide to do, I would not want to go with a campaign to get committed at, for example. I would want to go with a education on this is why we believe supervisory counseling could help, and here's maybe some reasons why not. I really do think that if we're looking for community engagement, true community engagement, we don't come with our point of view and try and get alignment and buy-in and that check the box. If we're going to do that, we should just vote tonight on adding it in, would be my perspective. If we're going to take the time, let's do it in a more neutral manner.
Commissioner Foreman?
I just want to echo everything Commissioner Schillender said about, I think public engagement is really important for this process. That's a huge part of why we're all here. I also, I guess, I'm not sure the best way to go about this, but supervisory counseling has taken up so much of these meetings because there's so much confusion around it, when it can be used, what it's for. That honestly, like, I'm happy to not have it because it's, to me, it seems, and this is a place where I want to tread carefully. When a complaint is made against an employee, their boss should be talking to them about it. So that, to me, is a given, that there is going to be some discussion of the situation that happened. That, if that's not the case, that's a completely separate problem that we have. So I guess that's kind of my 2 cents on the whole thing.
Any further discussion? All right.
Okay, one
Commissioner
more.
Bowman.
So I'm a strong believer in professional learning, and that's where I'm coming from, the supervisory counselor. However, I am also, it is assumed that people will have some opportunity for self-learning with their manager or surgeon. So if that, I mean, if we had that understanding, I'm quite fine. I was never actually advocating for a leading commended on, anyway, just in terms of the ongoing professional learning for officers.
Commissioner Schillender?
My last point, I think one thing that could help us not throw on supervisory council, we've got assurance with Commander Peterson that this happens every time. I would actually advocate, should we have the option to have none be the action taken, even if you find, because that's essentially what we're saying, is none, other than what you would already do. You would already do supervisory counseling, right? That's already part of the process. So I do think this probably requires a more broad discussion outside of the motion that's on the floor, which is, hey, let's stick with the bylaws. And then I think we can craft what is it we would want to get public input on to move forward and not swirl in these meetings on something.
Commissioner Forstrom?
Yeah, just a note, I mean, it's sort of implicit, in my opinion, in the ordinance, that the commission could choose none, and then it just goes up to the chief to decide what happens from there.
Any further discussion? All right, I will call the question. You don't have to carry votes because it's not actually a disposition. So all of those in favor of the motion of, instead of using the one pager that is uploaded to the BDI, we reference our bylaws, section 4. Nope, not section 4.
Page 4.
Page 4, but it is section 6, Article 6. We reference those disciplines and dispositions that are outlined, and those are the only options that we are allowed to recommend for our meetings. All those in favor of that, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. We can take up planning for additional community engagement at a different point and a venue, but I wanted to make sure that for the record, we all know what rules we're operating under and we are adhering to the bylaws as they are written. Deputy Director Commerce.
Trace, before we go to the closed portion, I just want to take a personal point of privilege and say that I have been with Hero for just over a year, and I've really seen the PCR grow. I've really, under your leadership, Chase, I have been so impressed with how you operate. When I started, you were not referencing the policies like you do, and you were not discussing an incident in those parameters. And I just wanted to admit and say, wow, you all are doing an amazing job. Keep it up. And it's just really been an honor to experience with those transformations. Thank you.
I appreciate it. All right, is there any other business to come before us in the public portion? All right, we will adjourn. Oh, Commissioner
I just
Brazier.
want to see if our visitor had anything he wanted to share.
I wish the videos were public that you guys take of these meetings. I had looked at your website and they don't appear to be public. There's like a video link, but it goes to like a 5-second clip or something. So,
Coordinator Cumberland. Thank you for that feedback. So we do have the live streaming links that should be active for each month, so you can join live. I like the idea of uploading the past public recordings though, so I would
Yes.
definitely go look into that. Thank you.
All right, any further public portion business? We will adjourn our public portion and we'll take a 10-minute break before we come back to our closed portion at 7:04.